to the special meeting on November 8th of the Avon Board of Education. And I should probably pull the microphone closer so that everybody can hear me on the television camera. The agenda has been previously distributed. I wanted to point out to the board members that we have a flyer at our positions on our table. If you're interested in attending the CABE November 17-18 annual meeting at the Mystic Marriott Hotel, please let Shirley Moy know in the superintendent's office, and there you go. The first item on the agenda is the results of the superintendent search. You also have a report from JE Consulting. So I'd like to call Joseph Harardi up, and so you can tell us what your findings have been. Well, first of all, what you did, sure, and then what your findings have been, and if that affects how we move forward.
Thank you, Houston. First, congratulations to all who were successful last evening. Congratulations to all who run for community office. I just think that's a badge of courage to do that. What I'd like to be able to share with you is the work that we have done in partnership over the past 2.5 months. I think it's important to note that the willingness for the community, for the school community, for parents, for the school board, the engagement that took place, I think, is almost unprecedented and very impressive. To reference that nearly 300 surveys were completed, that's a big number. The greatest coming from parents with children in your district, 180 parents participated. Community and a combination of community members and board members, well over 40, nearly 80 employees participated, and we had 5 students who took the time. I was really pleased with that. Along with that, I was charged by the Avon board to have an outreach and not say no, and that's what we did together. There are actually 24, not 23. I printed the document, and then I had a 24th meeting with the guidance department at Avon High School. There were 24 meetings that took place, and the range was from 2 of the meetings were one-on-one. Folks felt most comfortable in a private setting with me, to meetings that included up to 100 and 125 people, also known as the Avon High School faculty. What I tried to do for you with the executive summary, and it was really interesting. Whenever you leave an open-ended question at the end of a survey which states, and is there anything else you would like to share? That really can create lots of interesting reading. My favorite statement, by the way, of all of what I read was that your next superintendent will walk on water. That was from one of our community members. I'd like to be able to go through it. I don't want to read the document to you, but I think it's important to share it with the public and have it in your minutes, and have it on your broadcast. What I tried to do was to synthesize the more than 700 participants. Between those that I've met with, those that weighed in on the survey, there were over 700 participants in your community profile. I think it's also important to note that at a different time this evening, we'll talk about potential questions. And many of the questions that I'm suggesting that you ask to your candidates are directly reflected from the conversations that I had with many. So, with that all being said, the first 2 things I'd like to speak to are the character traits and the skill set that this community believes is most important for your next school leader. They want somebody who will think strategically for K-12 students. They are looking for somebody who is really sharp in the political frame and in the fiscal frame. The third piece, and these are not in any particular order, these are just the 5 largest chunks of information. And school board members, if you wish, I can certainly make available to you every word of every message. But over and over again, thematically, in meetings that I've had, in surveys that were compiled, to have an effective and an understood communication protocol. Superintendent to school board, superintendent to central office, superintendent to leadership team, superintendent to community, superintendent to faculty and staff. That was a reoccurring theme in many of our meetings. The hope of the community, particularly the school community, is that your new school leader is a distributive leader, willing to allow autonomy, but understand that the part must work as a whole. And they're looking for somebody who is a visionary leader. That, in some ways, is a combination of an additional theme in the literature was that a commitment that the new hire is going to really spend as much time as possible in the Avon community, in the Avon school community, and weighing that over the number of years. The conversation many times was around, we are really hopeful that our next school leader will be here for a very long time. There were no surprises that the reoccurring theme with character traits was all around honesty, caring, and trust. And I think we probably could have predicted that before I tabulated the results. You're looking for someone who is incredibly bright. And I just thought that the fifth item was, again, reoccurring, but less than your first four. Someone who's enthusiastic, someone who's genuine, and someone who has a sense of humor. It did not surprise me that the results, survey results, and my meeting results all sounded and looked alike. That this community believes that the Avon Public School District is in a really nice space. And they believe that, and they are most proud of the student who has a K-12 Avon Public School experience. That was clearly the greatest reoccurring conversation and scripted notes in the survey towards what goes well in Avon. Continuing on the success of the Avon District, it is the belief that the assembling of a very strong staff, administrative and faculty, is in place, that students in the Avon Public Schools have a deep opportunity with experiences, both authentic learning and instruction that will lead to success beyond Avon High School. This community believes that they are in partnership with you for the best of students, and they also believe that students and staff are privileged to work in a safe and nurturing environment. Challenges are what I think that you thought they might be. Real concern about how do you stretch a state dollar and a federal dollar doesn't seem to be arriving at the local level at the same size. Concern around the retention of key administrators and teachers. Further concern around trying to understand the depth and the need of school social workers, school psychologists, and counselors, and what does that all look like, and what is the engagement that must take place, and what must that new superintendent do to bring that conversation to a best place for children. The last item was around the behavioral code of conduct. This was a conversation particularly around your secondary schools, a consistency in the behavioral code of conduct. What I then did was I looked at all of the comments that were shared, and I tried to chunk them out for you. I put in bold print the comment that I think is the most prevalent and the most consistent. It was said a whole bunch of different ways. Some very politely and respectfully, and some ways that were a little bit more direct, and I'll just leave it that way. But the hope in this community is that there's a very clear and meaningful understanding of the roles and the responsibilities between the superintendent and all other stakeholders. School board being on top of that pile, along with the leadership team, faculty, and staff. I talked a little bit about, but I thought it was important to put it in the anecdotal comments that the new superintendent makes a commitment to this Avon community. They're hoping that the superintendent is visible at school events and in community events. The fourth bullet was, again, particularly a conversation with staff in leadership around retention, around leading, and around inspiring an already very strong team that's assembled in Avon. Must have real strong communication skills. I felt obligated to put the next bullet in because of the conversations that I've had with students, and that students at Avon High School are really hoping that the new superintendent will just watch until they graduate this year as seniors with open campus. I felt obligated to share that with you because I told them that I would. Not a surprise. The next item I think is important is, and I struggle trying to put it into words because it came to me in so many different ways, but this community wants a superintendent who has a defined personal credo, what they believe, they stick to what they believe, and they have an inner strength to always do what's right for children. I think that's a very important piece to the community profile. The superintendent, they're hoping, will embrace parents as partners, and the superintendent will never ever lose sight of why you look to hire, that they need to do what's best for children all of the time. That is an executive summary. I also included as attachments for you just a sense of the survey that was posted at numerous sites, and I just felt the obligation to share with you where the meetings have taken place leading up to this evening. That is the executive summary. I've sent this to Dr. Pattyfoot this morning, and certainly it's available to be posted on the Avon Public School website if you choose to do that. Questions or comments or thoughts around the profile?
I have a couple of comments that I would throw in for myself and then allow our fellow board members to ask questions. In the past, we have said that we don't view a PhD as mandatory. We want someone we feel is talented, and the academic title is not so important. I noticed that was not mentioned this time. Did you have any sense that that had been changed?
The way we advertised was that we did not speak to the PhD, to the doctoral degree. There were anecdotal comments that came through that that suggested the board pay attention to transcripts and to degrees.
Okay. I'm actually a little surprised at that. The next comment I would have is that it seems as though superintendents fall in one of two major categories. That they have an emphasis in what I would call fiscal/budgeting skills, or they have an emphasis in what I would call curriculum skills. There seem to be relatively two camps, and very few people are completely at equipoise. Did you have any input from the community? And that might be a bad question, or would you have, I think the more important question is, would you have any recommendations yourself based upon what you know about our district as to if there should be any one type we're looking for in preference of one instead of the other?
Yeah, Chairman Lamy, which is a great question. And what happened concurrently was we're building the community profile. I'm receiving information from board members as a community member. And with all of that taking place is that, as I mentioned too, I believe in your October meeting, the applicant pool is rich. And in many cases, the candidates that I'll be suggesting that you interview are cross-connected as strong leaders, fiscal leaders, managers, and strong instructional leaders. So I believe that you will have the opportunity to marriage that with candidates that you speak to in the near future.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Mr. Spivak.
Yes, having served on other search committees, I know sometimes there's a preference, either the committee or even the community, and you may have gathered from your information, looking for someone who has actually served as a superintendent, as opposed to some other type of role. And whether, either your opinion or what you've gathered from the information, what do you think? What
I believe is that It is a very difficult leap from a site-level building to a superintendency. With that belief, your suggested candidate pool are all central office experienced.
Mr. Burke?
Just curious, have you marketed this position beyond Connecticut as well? Or
Yes.
just- Okay.
Yeah. You had applicants from 7 different states.
Just to let you know, I made it clear to Mr. Arardi that we wanted a nationwide search because we wanted to say that if someone's qualified, and just because they come from outside of Connecticut doesn't mean that we should reject them automatically. So that was part of at least my private discussion.
Yeah, and
Okay.
candidates from as far as Washington and Arizona.
Okay, great.
Mrs. Shue?
Maybe I should look at the agenda, but is it too early for me to ask about next steps a little bit, or are we still focusing on this?
We can focus on next steps if you like,
Okay.
because he gave, attached to his report is the timeline.
That was the meetings that he had with the community.
I could speak to that though, if you'd like.
Well, I guess my curiosity is how many applications came in, how you vetted them to
Sure.
decide which ones we'll actually see,
Sure.
when will we get access to them,
Yeah.
since we're starting next week, I just want to.
Sure, there's a bucket to my left. That's filled with lots of homework for each one of you. So what will happen is that I believe that the board took action in August in discussion that the present school board plus the results of last evening would be the hiring committee. And I believe you're going to take action this evening with that. What then will happen, and I've been very open with everyone that I've spoken to and everyone that I've written to, is that you would not have the applicant pool. You had 31 inquire, you had 25 completed applications, and that's an enormous number. You would not have the applicant pool if that I could not assure confidentiality. So what will happen in a non-meeting, we'll have a discussion in a very short period of time. We will have a discussion around the candidates that I feel are most qualified to be your next superintendent. I'll have a shorter list of those that didn't make my cut for you to review, and that we are looking to do this work first round of the process next week. And I believe that unless the board feels differently, that you are still exactly on target with potentially taking action well in advance of your December break.
Let me just amplify on that a little bit, just to make it clear. I've had numerous discussions with Mr. Rardy about what I think is the appropriate process to go. So what he's doing is he's pre-vetted all of the stuff for us. He's come up with a list, and I assume I can say the number. He thinks 8 people should be interviewed. Originally, the suggestion was 6, so I assume he'll be telling us why he's picking 8. He's also giving us the pile of the people he is not recommending, and we will have a discussion about that tonight, because if we want to make it hypothetically 9, I don't want 25, but 9, that's fine. Or if we want to chop down 1 or 2 or swap someone out, that's perfectly fine. So while he's assisting us, he is not going to make our decision for us. So basically the charge to the search committee is to conduct interviews and therefore ultimately make a recommendation to the board, which the board then does what it does with the recommendations. We sometimes accept them. I assume since we're going to be mostly on the search committee, we will ultimately agree with our recommendation, but it's possible that we could not for some reason and we could change our mind. Obviously the search committee does not bind the board.
Other just logistical things, on past hiring committees, we've had scripted questions that we came up with, but everybody asked it, so we're going to discuss that as well.
My suggestion, Deb, would be that I've got 30 suggested questions that reflect what I've heard in this community, and that's just an opportunity. I would suggest that through the chair, if you want to have your own question that you want to ask, that's wherever you want to go, but I do have questions prepared.
Sure, you will.
But I'm hoping that the ideas the first round is kind of consistent for each candidate so that we can really compare a little bit closer than apples to oranges.
It's really important that you replicate the number and the opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as much as I am noted for asking unusual questions or non-scripted questions, generally speaking, we like to cover the same area. And I would imagine, although we haven't talked about how it's going to work, but the way we've done it in the past is we give each board member a certain amount of time to ask some questions. There's usually an understanding that you're going to be asking the same basic series of questions, but if someone gets carried away on one question, you may only end up having one with answers for one. But I imagine it would be somewhat similar to the way we did searching for the interim superintendent in terms of the actual process. Okay, further questions?
Yes.
As much as I may regret this, I would like to read the comments. So that was something I stated before.
Sure.
I remain consistent, that I think it's important.
Mhm.
And we'll be happy to get those to you. All right. Then I'd probably like to surprise the interim superintendent and ask if there's anything that she thinks we should take into account in the process that we might have overlooked inadvertently, because it's always nice to have an extra wise head, and you have been a superintendent for a very long time, and I don't want to waste that resource.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I think your process sounds like a thorough process. I would hope it's someone who has experience as a superintendent, because I think you're at a great crossroads here, but you really have to move some things forward. And so I think someone with experience at the central office and dealing with budgets and curriculum and all aspects of the job would be very important here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me go into, before I appoint the new people, and I believe Mr. Kavanaugh has just come in, so I'd like to say congratulations on winning the election, and we look forward to working with you, and welcome. This is a committee that the board established by vote. The committee is the Superintendent Search Committee. The intention of the Superintendent Search Committee is to have, to conduct the interviewing process. I envision it will work by consensus, but the composition is going to be until the end of the year, because that's when we reform committees, as all of us know. The current board, which has already been appointed, and the three new people, Mr. Fleischman, Mr. Oberka, and Mr. Kavanaugh, as being the winners, would be also put on the committee, will also participate. We are going to go through the process, because as a committee we can have what we call non-meetings. So after this, it's not that the meeting resumes, it's a non-meeting starts. As with every board committee, the committees themselves don't actually take what I would call line action. They make recommendations to the board. Now, when we select a new superintendent, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just the old board picking a new superintendent who then didn't meet the three people coming on board, didn't have the experience of the three people going off the board, and gets to know the people that they're going to work for. That's why I wanted the large interviewing committee. The timing, since it will be a board decision, is affected as to when it occurs. I'm envisioning it's going to actually happen before the end of the year, because at that point then you usually have 60, 90 days that the new superintendent has to give notice to the last job before they can start. So even if we say December 31st, one of the last actions of the old board, that you've got the job, they still wouldn't be starting until April 1st. Now, it's possible they might be able to start a little bit earlier, and the reason that we're not starting off from scratch with the new board in January is the interim superintendent, and all interim superintendents can only work 45% of the year for pension reasons, because there's a rule for that. So if Mrs. Pattyfoot is not, there's a point at which she becomes the proverbial pumpkin in Cinderella, and I don't want to have to worry about doing a hire in May and hire a second interim, because I think that would not be good. So this was my methodology for doing this. I think the board accepted it. I've been asked by several board members to explain what I did, because it's a little unusual, although the board did go for it, and to put this forth so that there's no misunderstanding on the board side, or you guys weren't here, just to make sure you understand where the process is. Now, obviously, if the hiring process goes past January 1st, we always have a reorganization because the committees get reformed and everybody gets reappointed, in which case I would envision that we'd probably drop off the 3 retiring board members, and then the new board would still be making the appointment. So at that point, I wanted to ask if anyone had questions before I made the appointment. Oh, Mrs. Young.
Can you explain, and I don't know whether it's by state statute or our bylaws, but as I recall, the new board members who are elected in November don't actually become legally bound by all the things that we're bound to until January 1st.
Correct.
So,
And they don't take the oath of office until January 1st.
right. So can you explain for the record who will actually be voting on the different people who come before us and what that will look like in process?
The voting is not public, but each person gets 1 vote, which then becomes a recommendation to the full board, where each person on the full board gets 1 vote, however the board is constituted at that time, and the full board makes the decision. Now, is the full board bound by what the Personnel Committee does? No. It could be something happens and we decide it's inappropriate and we're going to restart the search. Hopefully that's not going to be the case. Do I anticipate having factions? We've never had them. We've always moved by consensus. So I assume that our new people understand that, certainly for business reasons, they won't be posting people's resumes on Facebook, because that would be silly. But it would be, all right, well, all right.
More than silly.
Very silly. But, you know, they understand that it's a confidential process, and obviously people who are interested in it are not going to want their name, shall we say, spread about. So it's like when we have other committees where we have other members of the public, that's the basis on which they're being there, and the full board, however it's constituted at the time it wants to make its decision, is the one that makes the decision. You're welcome. Further questions? Sure.
I also would like to make a clarification. I had encouraged all new board members to become familiar with policies. First and foremost, though, the bylaws, which are Series 9000. To that effect, I'd like to bring attention, because we're having tonight executive session and discussion of a non-meeting, I'd like to bring to your attention bylaw 9322, which describes types of meetings. Unfortunately, there's been some inaccuracies that have been published lately during the political process, so I want to make sure that you are indeed reading the accurate rules. This bylaw is by state statute. We follow it. There's no deviation, and having executive sessions is not trying to hide or not be transparent. There are reasons for them, appropriate reasons. So I just want to make sure that's crystal clear, and if there are any questions or the things that were inaccurately stated previously, please ask Houston, myself, or Dr. Pattyfoot. Thank you.
Just so it is clear, I spoke to each person to explain we're going to have an open meeting tonight. We're going to be talking about what we're talking about now. Then we're going to go into executive session. I said we were going to throw them out. I said I didn't think it would take long to be in executive session. And then we're going to come back and we're going to have a non-meeting. And so I think everybody understands that, and they understand that there will be a little bit of shuffling about, and we apologize for how awkward that feels sometimes.
So
But
we'll adjourn and then have a non-meeting.
correct. Well,
We have to have an executive session first, then come back into open session.
Right.
Then
And then
adjourn,
adjourn. That's
and
what
then
I'm
go
thinking.
into a non.
Yes.
Do this, we have
Proper.
to take
Right.
a vote to welcome them onto the committee.
technically, I get to make the appointment, so I will just say, Mr. Fleischman, Mr. Oprika, Mr. Kavanaugh, I hereby appoint you to the Superintendent Search Committee. Thank you very much for agreeing to serve, at least I assume you're agreeing to serve, and we look forward to your service and appreciate your help very much. We could have a small round of applause. All right, is there further matters that we need to handle in open session? Hearing none, I will say it's, unless someone's going to object, by unanimous consent at 7:35 p.m. We're moving into executive session, which means we will throw everybody out, we'll let our cameraman break down, and then we will do our executive session, and we'll come get you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.